And thank you so much for joining us for our first virtual coaching session in this annual initiative, the High Potential Week, brought to you by People Matters along with Right Management. This is the second year in a row for this unique initiative, and we are very excited, and we thank you all for the overwhelming response that we've been receiving towards this initiative. People Matters and Right Management collaboratively organized this special annual initiative, the HiPo Week, helping organizations to decipher the right way to identify and develop high potentials within their teams. This is a gateway for all of you to get answers to your queries and questions in this arena. Right Management is a global leader in talent and career management workforce solutions within the Manpower Group. The firm designs and delivers solutions to align talent strategy with the business strategy. With over 3,500 employees working out of more than 3,000 service locations in over 50 countries around the world, Right Management has the skills and resources in place to solve workforce management challenges and help grow talent, reduce costs, and accelerate performance. Within this week, from the 12th till the 16th of May, we will bring to you a set of initiatives, events, including video launches, webinars, content-focused newsletters, tweet chats, radio programs, virtual coaching sessions like this one, as well as a masterclass. You could follow the hashtag HiPoWeek for updates as well as visit the website www.peoplematters.in/hypo for more details. For the first of its virtual coaching sessions today, which is going to be on HiPos, organizations and their challenges, we have with us Neelangana Paul, Executive Coach with Right Management India, and Principal Consultant across the chasm, ex-Vice President, New Product Development, Wipro, and Chaitali Mukherjee, Country Manager, India, Right Management. The session will focus on helping businesses and HiPos face their respective challenges and in finding appropriate solutions. It will also offer insights on both fronts, covering issues faced by HiPos themselves after being recognized as one and by the organizations in managing them. With that, let me not come in between our audience and our coaches, facilitators for this session. I would like to hand it over to Tuhina Panda from Right Management. Over to you, Tuhina.
Hi, thank you, Puneet. Welcome everyone to the first virtual coaching session of the HiPo Week. We are very excited to host this session for everyone here today. The HiPo Week, as Puneet also shared, is a very unique event initiated by Right Management, dedicated to the high potential leader development journey. Through this entire week, we hope to share with you different perspectives and stories of the various stakeholders involved in the HiPo program, clients, business leaders, coaches, high potential employees. For today's session, the objective is to share best practices on coaching high potentials. And as most of you would be aware, that a high potential leader development journey is quite intense and focused. The coaching process is known to significantly aid and strengthen the learning of the leader by providing high potentials with a strong sounding board, one who brings years of experience in the world of work and maybe even personal experience as a high potential themselves. Today we will try to address the key challenges and questions that high potentials face in their path forward and how coaches usually address the same. We hope the session is insightful and helps answer the many questions, known and unknown, that you might have come across as a HiPo or as any other key stakeholder in this process. So for today, I would like to share with you a brief on the agenda that we would be covering. I will request Chaitali to share a little bit in terms of the context of today's session, and then we will start through a list of questions that we have prepared, which Chaitali and Neelanjana will take us through today. The questions will primarily revolve around the life of a HiPo. How does it? What are the typical questions and challenges they face? How does the coaching process help and address these particular challenges? And certain FAQs that might be in your mind as a HiPo or even as a key stakeholder that you might want to be aware of. With this, I would also want to share a little bit more about both our facilitators today. We have, first of all, Miss Nilanjana Paul with us. She has 27 years of experience servicing global and domestic clients across industries like IT, BPO, consulting services. She has been a business leader in two sunrise industries that have reached unprecedented success, IT and BPO. The Nilanjana joined SpectraMind in 2007 as an entrepreneur and successfully led the business development and relationship management function for 3 years there, which saw SpectraMind reach the top slot in India as the fastest growing Indian company across industries. In 2002, SpectraMind was acquired by Wipro, and Neelu moved on to become the Vice President of New Product Development at Wipro. She has also spent the first 13 years of her career with NIIT, handling roles in sales, marketing, product management, and general management roles. Since 2005, she has been sharing her expertise by offering advisory and consulting services in business strategy, assessments, executive coaching to global and domestic organizations. We also have with us today Ms. Chaitali Mukherjee. She is a strategy and talent management expert, and in addition to being the country manager for Right Management India, also serves as the India region practice leader for Talent Assessment Center of Excellence. Her work experience spans across the areas of business and corporate strategy, individual, team, and organizational assessment, HR strategy, system design, org design, and change management. She has worked extensively with Indian and global clients, particularly in the public sector, telecom domain, auto sector, and FMCG. Prior to Right, Chaitali has worked with IBM Global Services in the strategy and change team for India, where she led large-scale assignments in technology-driven transformation and change. And prior to IBM, she also worked as a business consultant with the global consulting practice for Tata Consultancy Services. Some of the key programs that she led as part of TCS was in business turnaround, process reengineering, org transformation, and change management across various industries. With this, I would like to welcome Chaitali to please share the key themes of our session today and start with the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Tuhina. A warm welcome to everyone who has actually taken time out to actually join us for this virtual coaching session. So like, Puneet and Tuhina mentioned, this is our second initiative into the High Potential event, where we have been trying to celebrate high potentials, and we've been trying to create some kind of thought leadership in the high potential development space. So the thought of virtual coaching came to us because with every client that we work in the high potential space, be it for building talent pipeline or be it for building successors, the number one solution that organizations look for is actually coaching. Having said that, while coaching definitely helps high potentials a big way, not everybody gets the opportunity to be coached because A, it is elite, B, it is expensive, and C, it takes a lot of commitment both from the organization and the individual side, which is why many times organizations are fairly selective about coaching. And hence, when we were actually designing this entire High Potential Week for the year 2014, we thought about getting the whole coaching format to a larger audience, high potentials as well as aspiring high potentials, and helping them understand, even without getting a coach, how can they make the best use of the skills, the potential that they have with them, and go about trying to develop themselves. And hence this entire format of virtual coaching. And we got some of the best people in the industry who work with us as coaches at senior levels to actually come and do this. So we have the one today, and then we have the next one with Rotash on 23rd. So let's try and understand a little about the themes that we identified for virtual coaching. It wasn't about just going and speaking about anything and everything about coaching. It was very important for us to understand what is it that most of the individuals who are either getting coached or would like to be coached or are HiPos or aspiring to be HiPos, what are the typical questions that would matter to them. We opened it up for larger audience to put the questions on the table, and on the basis of all the questions that we received and all the questions that we have always been getting from participants who are either getting coached or aspiring to get coached, we identified 5 key themes around which the whole conversation will happen today. And out of the 5 themes, 4 themes are specifically for high potentials, And one of the themes is basically for people who are or sponsors who are handling high potential programs, typically for the HR fraternity, who put high potential coaching on the table, and they are the ones who also anchor the entire initiative for the organization. So the first three themes are actually around how does my life change the moment I'm identified as a high potential? How do I get the complete clarity? So for the people who had joined us last year, they would know there was a complete day where we discussed in detail about notifying high potentials. So most organizations, depending upon their maturity, do not actually notify high potentials. So in that kind of a situation, how do I see clarity on whether I am a high potential or not, particularly when my organization hasn't notified? I think the more important conversation that we'll invite Neelu to actually put on the table is how important is it for me to be notified, and how do I actually work while I'm notified or while I'm not notified. And then I think the other conversation that we had last year, again, it's a carry forward from that, which is development of skills for future roles versus focus on my current skills. We all realize that we get picked most of the times for what we put on the table, and on the back of that, we are actually asked to do things which we have never done in the past. Potential is, after all about that, isn't it? Being able to do things that you have never done in the past. But my very skills that have got me today successful in my current role are very different, perhaps, from what is expected out of me for my future roles. And I think that's going to be a center stage conversation for us today, when we will try and understand a little more around how important is it to develop some of those skills, particularly when the organization doesn't have the platform to get me to develop those. Because when we get overtly consumed as a high potential in 110% of my job, which is today, and if that is very execution focused, how do I create space, need, and desire to actually develop skills which may not seem relevant for my current job, but they're extremely important for my future job? And then, of course, the last question that we will try and cover today for high potentials is, what can I do if I'm identified but there isn't much that the organization is doing for my development? And we'll try and understand how much does it remain within the high potential to do what he or she wants to do with his or her career. And finally, the fourth question that I was mentioning, which is for our HR fraternity. We all are operating in the VUCA environment, as we all understand, and we are in complete cognizance of that. The business comes back to us each day with a different requirement that they are putting on the table. So in such a situation, how do I design and sustain a high potential program which at the end of the day has the definition of high potential changing each time? So say for instance, today my organization had a very different view of who's going to take my organization to the next level. And then suddenly today that definition itself has changed. So if I have created a program around developing and assessing high potentials around a previous definition, how do I actually keep that entire fraternity relevant, and at the same time, how do I continue to add value to the organization? So these are some of the themes around which we will actually have our entire conversation today. We are structured around each theme with 2 or 3 questions which were invited from the participants. And after we have covered them, if we have some time, we will also cover a few questions that the participants can actually always put across to us in the Q&A section on the right-hand side. Yeah. So with that, I'll actually start with the first theme, which is basically around how does my life change after being identified as a hypo? And this is where we are going to try and understand the changes in expectations as I get identified as a hypo. And for this particular one, Neelu, we actually got 2 key questions. One was, what does the organization expect out of me now that I have been identified as a hypo? And the other one was, what can I expect out of the organization now that I'm considered as a hypo? And how do I get to know both, whether I'm identified or I'm not identified? So it would be great if you're able to share some of your thoughts, basis some of the coaching that you do with senior leaders who actually put a similar question on the table. So Neelu, over to you.
Thank you, Chaitali. That was very well summarized. And basically, I'm starting with the first question that you kind of pointed out, which is what does the organization expect of me now that I'm a hypo? The minute the organization is tagging something as a hypo, it is usually a well thought out program. It's not a surprise. By and large, a hypo program will come with some defined specifics. It could be something to do with disruptive innovation or breakthrough thinking. Rest assured that it won't be expecting you to do the same things that other leaders are expected to do. It won't be the usual KRA oriented or goal oriented stuff. It will be usually something different for which this high potential program has been defined and structured. The second issue is, again, if the expectation of the organization is not clear, I would say that it's a good, if somebody is being notified as a high potential, it's a good thing to get into the practice of asking what are the kinds of expectations that the organization has. So that's broadly a little bit about the first part. On what should I expect if I have been notified as a high potential, formally or informally, what can I expect from the organization? Most of the time it could have been clarified, but again, some of the more common elements that we see are many a times the HiPo is expected to have a faster track roadmap. Of course, it is based on the contribution they make, but sometimes some glimpses of that roadmap are shared up front. I can expect to do that if I've been notified. Sometimes some of the more challenging tasks which don't quite fit into the business model, don't quite fit in with today's way of working, are actually some of the things I would expect the organization to point me towards. So usually one is not expected to start with a open slate and say, okay, now that I'm an HiPo, I am expected to think everything on my own. But yes, some thinking might exist. So the organization would typically give me an indication on which kinds of things they are expecting me to do. By and large, also a HiPo candidate can expect better development opportunities. If not a coaching program, it could be nomination to some specific kinds of strategic thinking seminars, or the chance to work with internal and external forums on a live project. It gives a higher visibility to some of the things that they are expected to solve. And of course, last but not the least, a lot of times HiPo comes linked with better pay or something linked closely to the kind of contribution the HiPo is making.
Right. So, Neelu, I think one of the things that we also got asked when this question was actually being laid on the table was, I have been given symptoms, or I have been told in different ways that, I am a high potential. So in such a situation, what does the organization expect out of me, particularly when they are not notifying clearly to me? So what would be your advice to an individual who puts this kind of a situation on the table as a coachee?
Right. So I would say that first of all, be clear that high potential means something specific. That does not mean as an employee I'm not valued. So because I have been given, signals or feelers that, you're a valuable employee, I would be wary about jumping to the conclusion that I'm a high potential. So I would say go out there, whether with HR or with your upstream manager, clarify whether or not this is a formal, structured, program, or is it that you're expected, and what exactly you're supposed to fulfill? Because usually a high potential comes with some expectations. I would say the sooner you clarify those expectations, the better it is for both the organization and the high potential to get on with actually matching and rolling out what is expected to be done to meet those expectations. So go out and clarify if you have any doubt. Being valuable does not automatically make a high potential candidate.
It's a very important point you've made, Neelu, because whenever we are actually speaking with clients, and as part of our client interactions, whenever we have individuals who become part of the process, we also advise clients as there are three kinds of talent that you have in an organization who are actually, important for your business. Of course, there is the high potential who you are actually pegging for the business for the future. You have your current performers who are equally important because they actually make your ship move, right? And organizations many a times are also giving a lot of importance to them. And then there are individuals who the organization hires from the outside world in anticipation of high potential and contribution, but they are typically new people whose potential or their performance is not yet measured, and it is all yet to be displayed. And I think most of the times all the three do get to see a lot of value that the organizations put on the table, but their definitions are very, very different and very articulately different. So whether the organization is clarified to them, and if I am that individual who wants to know whether I fall into which of the three categories, or do I fall into any of the three categories, I think that clarification is something that ought to be sought, so that when you go forward, you definitely know what you need to do and you don't need to do.
Very good, Chaitali, very good point. And I'm going to share a related expectation, which is quite often in coaching, before coaching, there is this hesitation that if I'm not a hypo, do I need to start looking for opportunities? What's there in store? So, this is related to what you just shared, which is there
Yeah.
are various kinds of recognition of employees' contributions. Hypo is only a culmination of the state of the market, state of the company's journey currently. They might be a market leader, or they might be an early stage entrant to a particular kind of product or service that is being offered. In addition, of course, to the candidate's own track record and perceived potential. So it is not that once a hypo is always a hypo. So a hypo is not a permanent fixture in some elite club. Earning
Right.
it does not make the person retire, and nor is life hopeless for those who are not hypo at the moment. So that would be something that's, always a very dynamic thing. One message I would like to leave for anybody who has questions about, now that I am not a hypo, what happens in life, is that one can always aspire to be part of that hypo. One just has to figure out what is considered to be potential, high potential, and what one needs to do to be there. But while this session is about high potentials, and I'm very conscious of that, you must also remember that there are other kinds of specialists, other kinds of valuable resources who are equally valuable, but because their skill set may not be broad-based, they may not be notified as a hypo. Example, there are people
Sure.
who are specialists in R&D, or they are specialists in certain kinds of very deep knowledge. They are equally valuable for the company. They may be appearing in small numbers, and they may not be a part of the hypo program. So hypo program is one very clearly defined program. It doesn't mean that there are not other valuable skill sets or expectations the organization has of others.
Thanks, Neelu. In fact, it's pretty much in sync with the next question that we had, which was, if I'm not a hypo, does it mean that I need to look outside my organization for opportunities, and what's in its store for me from now on? So, what would be your advice to an individual who either may have been notified, maybe was part of the hypo club earlier, isn't now, or it's a new process that their organization has begun, and I have been consistently a high performer, but for some reason, and we call it the 9 box, right, and I'm not appearing in the 5th, 7th or 9th grid of my, or 8th or 9th grid of my organization. So what should
Right.
I actually do? Does it mean it's the end of the world for me in the organization?
Right. So I think since you kind of shared this concept of the grid, by definition, people in the 8th and 9th box can be a certain number. So first and foremost, I think it's important to recognize that. The second is what is taking people into the 8th and 9th grid. There are some clear-cut and well-defined criteria based on hypo selection. Some of them include very innovative and interesting ways of selecting hypos, including from not only nomination, but from peer evaluation and even customer evaluation. Some of the actual results that people bring to the table. So I have to gauge whether, if I'm a kind of somebody sitting in the 7th, on the grid, I'm sitting at 7 or 6, I have to actually tune my future development and my focus on what it takes to get to the 8 and the 9. That is the first thing. The second, of course, is the 8 and the 9 might have certain things which, like the specialists I spoke about, the R&D people, they might not actually. One of the things for hypo quite often that I see is should have handled a P&L, should have handled large teams. Now, if I'm sitting in R&D, by definition, I have 20 people. So I'm unlikely to have handled a large team of maybe, 200, 300 people. So then it is my call to see which way I want to take my career. Do I want to remain in this specialized function, or do I want to throw in my hat and say, look, I am game for a stint in operations or production or sales management or whatever the function it is that I think I'm, geared up for, and actually, gun to be put my stakes on the hypo bit as well. So that is really the broad way to look at this. And second is, of course, just because I'm not a hypo this year doesn't mean I will not be in the future.
Thanks, Neelu. And I think most of the times when we have had this conversation with a few people that, we are having conversations, particularly in case when we are also meeting very senior leaders who say that I lost some talent from my organization, and when we try and understand, and this is typically the conversation around engagement, and the manager stands up and says that, I don't know what to do about it, because if I don't put him into the high potential bracket, the talent feels that I am not actually valuing him or her enough, and hence I need to put that talent into the high potential bracket. Having said that, the organization is kind of convinced that he or she at least isn't a high potential for this particular year. But it's not that they are not seeing them as an important or a critical talent for the organization. There has to be a realization that the number of opportunities that can be made available in any organization with the future plans in mind, which is what you try and put for high potentials, are very, very limited. And if it is about those opportunities, you really want to ensure that you are able to select someone who is consistently doing what you're wanting to look at from a future perspective. And I think that's where this understanding in the mind of that I am not a high potential this year, so what can I do for the next year, it becomes a very important conversation.
And I think equally, Chetali, it is very critical to design the HiPo program so that one has a message for the people who are not included. So
that's
those
right.
who are responsible, the HR fraternity or, business leaders who contribute to making the program must remember that generating a list of HiPos should not automatically mean exits for somebody else. And of course, we haven't even kind of touched upon one very critical thing, which is all of this changes when there's a merger or acquisition. Yesterday I was a telecom company, today I'm part of a software company. Suddenly the entire scale and the environment and the kind of competency capability I'm looking at building has changed completely. So one must be sensitive to all that, which I hope we will cover somewhere.
Sure. So with that, we come to the very important second topic, which has always been it's literally been a bone of contention when we discuss high potentials, and that is around notification of high potentials. And I recollect even last year when we were doing the entire high potential week, the first day being on identification, the second day being on notification. It was the day which actually sought maximum interest from all directions, be it HR sponsors, be it CEOs, be it high potentials themselves or aspiring high potentials, because everybody wanted a straight cut answer to what is the right thing, what's the best practice, should we notify or we shouldn't notify. And the answer, of course, was there isn't a shortcut and a clear cut answer to it. At the end of the day, it depends upon the maturity of your organization, it depends upon the preparedness and the commitment of all your stakeholders. So with that background in mind, when we were inviting questions for virtual coaching, again this came up really big in terms of how do I see clarity on whether I'm a hypo or not. And in fact, there were two similar questions that came on the table, Neelu, which I'd like to put on the table for all our participants. One was somebody who had gone through an assessment exercise, and he or she asked us saying that, I went through an assessment exercise. Now I see that I'm being increasingly being put into projects outside my core area of expertise. But maybe because the organization doesn't have a clearly laid out process of high potential notification, the individual is not sure. So the question was, just because I'm being put into projects outside my core area of expertise, should I assume that I'm a hypo? The other one was even more interesting. The individual stood up and said, I have been selected to the Elite 25 club in my organization, but it's not necessary that my organization is clearly defined what Elite 25 is. So does that mean if I'm Elite 25, I'm a high potential? So what would be your take on both these questions, Neelu?
So first I would like to address the first one, which is that a leader has been identified for an assessment exercise, and through that exercise they are increasingly being put into, lead projects outside of their core area of expertise, right? So I would say that regardless of whether it's a sign of being designated as a hypo or not, being given an opportunity to lead projects and work in projects outside the comfort zone, it's a very good thing. It's a little bit like who moved my cheese. We get very complacent in our roles. So whether the trigger is an assessment exercise or post an assessment exercise, somewhere I have come into the limelight, or even without an assessment exercise, suddenly I find that there is a whole bunch of projects coming my way that really, really aren't my, core skills. I would say that's a good thing. Embrace it, use it as a learning opportunity, because the learnings will be very valuable with or without a hypo in the future. Uh, One of the two things, and research validates this, increasingly organizations are valuing leaders more and more if they are able to study, survive, and master unknown terrain with little or no guidance. So if you're getting projects which are not your core area, go conquer them, and think of it as a good thing. Does it mean automatically that I'm a hypo? I'll take you back to the first part of the discussion. It could certainly mean that you're in the radar, but whether it's actually called hypo or not, I think is something that you have to take the initiative to clarify. The second part is ELIT 25. If I am part of ELIT 25, am I a hypo? ELIT 25 means different things to different companies. Some companies look at critical talent as ELIT 25. Some companies look at top talent as ELIT 25. Somebody might have been appraised at the highest rating X number of years in a row, so they are probably top talent. Hypo could mean this, or it could mean something else. For instance, I might have 5 years of getting the best ratings, but the company might be at a stage where they are at crossroads, where they are trying to move from being a manufacturing organization to a partly services organization. My critical talent and my top talent are all around manufacturing and past performance, but I might be actually looking for a hypo program to create a new breed of leaders who take me to the next, through the next 5 to 10 years journey. So be careful of assuming that ELIT 25 is automatically something. So again, I would say it's a good opportunity. Usually there will be enough information. If not, please clarify what's the difference between, is it the same thing as hypo?
Very interesting take on this, Neelu. In fact, when we go back to organizations with post and assessment center, typically when organizations are running development centers or assessment centers, they're running it with a variety of mandate, Typically, they are actually running it either to identify high potentials, which is the most obvious and the number one reason, but they are also actually doing it for succession planning. And succession planning just does not necessarily mean my high potentials actually get all the big roles, because succession planning happens around high potential talent and critical talent. And succession planning at the end of the day is around important roles for which we are trying to check out future incumbents. A lot of organizations are also doing assessment centers to build a talent bench in the organization, and in a lot of organizations we do assessment centers around something what we call as leadership archetypes, which is basically around defining 5 or 6 key competency combinations, which we call as archetypes, which are more futuristic in nature, but they are the kind of leaders the organization needs. And typically when we are doing this for organization, this data point comes to the organization after all the assessments have been completed, and you identify that there are certain kinds of roles, say a change agent or a process excellence champion, for which there aren't too many people in the organization. So we stand up and we advise the organization that, when you're trying to look at your organization for future, these roles could potentially be blind spots for your organization. Say less than 5 to 7% of your talent only shows the skills in these archetypes or in these role types. You potentially have a big challenge if you lose that 5 to 7% of that talent. And in those situations, the number one question that HR actually stands up and asks us is, so who are those people whom we can develop for those roles? And that is where we look at the potential scores, the personality types, or the perception of various people who have gone through the assessment, and we give them a list of individuals who could actually fill that vacuum, or could be groomed to fill that vacuum. And I think the first question that has been asked, which is now I am being increasingly put into projects outside my core area of expertise, it could also be an answer to that the organization realizes that there are certain individuals who can potentially fill certain archetypes for which we do not have enough talent in the organization. But as we do it for various organizations, the ones who are actually being groomed for certain archetypes may or may not be the list of 25, 30 or whatever number organizations decide to put of the high potentials. So as I said, there is critical talent, there is high potential talent, and then there is the performer talent. It depends what the organization's end objective is around doing the assessment and using the data around the assessment. And I think that clarity of purpose is the most important element.
Absolutely, and Chaitali, I would like to add that sometimes the entire industry, I've come from two industries which did not exist. So
Right.
you're not going to find ready-made talent for a particular industry when it has never existed. For instance, today there is a whole big wave happening around renewable. Now, what does it mean? Does it mean solar? Does it mean wind? Within solar, does it mean commercialization of small solar equipment? Does it mean powering cities? Does it have to have somebody who understands government and regulatory, that mechanism well? So, especially in a new industry and as an organization changes gears, it's going to be harder and harder to find ready-made talent. The whole point of a high potential program is to develop things, capabilities in leaders which will take them through this process of transition on an ongoing basis. And I don't think, product life cycles are going to change once every 20 years. It's going to become shorter and shorter, and one needs a pool of such talent always to keep pace with that churn.
Sure. And I think that kind of summarizes at the end of the day, it's important to be picked up for a variety of reasons within the organization, but it does not necessarily mean that if I am being picked up for those variety of reasons, it basically means I am a high potential. But I think there is a value in being picked up for something, because there is a huge lot which doesn't get picked up for anything. So I think understanding, seeking clarity on purpose of why I am making the cut for whatever I am making the cut, so that I know what are the edges I really need to sharpen, is really going to help the talent.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Which is very well connected to the next question that we had got at, and we had got this question number of times. There were multiple votes on this question, should I say, where a lot of people stood up, and this is the classic question of notification, right, Neelu? Which is, how do I understand whether the organization considers me a hypo or not?
Right. And again, like we've been talking about it, there is no right answer. By and large, it is explicit program and explicit communication. And yet there is a lot of pockets where it is implicit because the organization does not probably have the time and resources to put together a very formal structured program, and nor does one have to create a very fancy gun to actually tackle a problem which could be done with lesser resources. So the process of hypo notification is usually clear. However, and I think last year you had somebody from Mahindra.
Yes, that's right.
Namrata?
Namrata from Mahindra Auto.
I remember she had actually clarified a lot about how this whole process starts, how is notification done, how is the process managed. So usually it's not something that I have to understand. If it's a structured organization which by and large operates through well-structured processes, then I think the notification is clearer. If not, I would like to say the middle, in between the high and the po, should come a word called initiative. Show some of that initiative and figure out whether it is something that you are or are not a part of, because it will make a world of difference to what you continue to do in your day to day, or your routine. How much does it get impacted because of being considered a hypo or not? So there are other, you'll find probably, that you might have been given a communication that sort of talks about being a hypo, but the system may not have been mature enough to have done everything and perfectly managed everything, including your manager's expectations, other stakeholders' expectations, your team's expectations. Now that my boss has been notified as a hypo, what do I expect? Do I also automatically qualify? So all kinds of communication will keep popping back, and there might not have been everything tied up to the last dot, or the last dash might not have been crossed. So show some of that initiative and actually take the onus to clarify whether you are being considered as hypo or not, and how far is the journey. I mean, considered is a broad word. Are you expected to be a hypo in this quarter, this year, or over a period of time? I think a lot of things will change based on that answer. And in any case, if you believe that you are being considered for hypo, I think it is time to make a mindset change of some sort.
Fair, fair. In fact, the next question is something that I wanted to ask you, Neelu, and a lot of people also came and asked us, how often have you faced this question from leaders who are being coached? So, a lot many times when you're coaching emerging leaders, they get they get put to a coaching intervention, and when they are getting coached, and they could have been identified for the coaching intervention through a variety, because of a variety of reasons. Either they would have gone through a development or an assessment center, or the organization is running some drive which maybe the individuals who are going through the process for the next level are not even aware why. So there is a certain amount of confusion, anxiety, all of it that comes together when they are being put through a coaching, and end up asking, why am I going through this? Am I a high potential, or because at a lot of places, and I've seen this even at very senior levels, Neelu, when we are having conversations around coaching, there is a certain amount of thinking in India which also associates coaching with correction. So a lot of leaders end up saying, well, am I being put through a coaching intervention because there are issues with me which I need to correct? So how often have you come across this question, and what's been your response to something like this?
Yeah, thank you, Chaitali. I resonate entirely with the question, and I'll pick up one word from what you mentioned, which is anxiety. I think in India especially, and it's very different when we talk to leaders being coached around the world and some of the people that we do coach in other geographies. In more mature environments, it is understood that usually coaching is a tool meant for the high potential. But in India, we haven't quite come to that level of maturity. So many a times there is a perception, and I think the perception starts with our fascination for coaching classes. So when you don't know maths, you're sent to a remedial coaching class for correcting that weakness in maths. So the word coaching sometimes brings a connotation like that. But coaching is actually, the correct way to use coaching is not to remedy something. There are many others. If there is a remedial behavior problem, and that is the primary reason why the person is coming for coaching, usually I will come back and ask the organization, do you think this is a leader with a high potential for the future? Then remedying some behavior makes sense. But if the person is never even in the high potential running, I think coaching is a waste of a tool. It's like not using the other systems enough, the appraisal, the feedback, the 360 degree, and depending on coaching to correct a problem rather than unleash the potential. So this question comes all the time, and in fact many a times I have separate sessions to actually, one of the most anxious questions I've heard from a leader, and that's as much a reflection, and it was a high potential leader. The interesting thing is it wasn't a case of remedy. It's a message that the organization has given the leader, which is somewhat incomplete, because I remember him sitting there in front of me and saying, I must have done something to be sitting here. What have I done? And, while I was sort of taken aback, it turned out that he actually had all the characteristics of a high potential leader, just that somebody had not really, because the journey was new, they had never used coaching as a tool, had not explained to him that, this is something which is a big boon and a big bonus and something special the organization is doing, and not a punishment.
Right. And Neelu, we come across the situation a lot, many times. Most of the times when organizations are doing it for the first time. The organizations themselves, maybe these sponsors from the business or the HR side, and particularly when they are dealing with either high-profile leaders within the organization system or extremely critical talent, as they like to call them. So they are a talent. That's that group whom they do not want to annoy or do not want to offend. So they are also looking at someone else who can actually go and put the message on the table. That this leader really needs to improve, but we do not have a backup for this leader. So they are hoping, is what I like to say, that they will have the answer in coaching. And in those kind of situations, our advice usually to the organization has been, there is no alternative to being transparent.
Absolutely.
Because
and
if you are
fair, yeah, absolutely.
If you are not going to be transparent with that leader will never come to know what is the degree to which the organization is trying to change that individual, and to what extent the problem has actually emerged. So I think that's a very very important one, and so I think for all the HR fraternity on this call, it is pretty much an answer or an advice even to them in terms of how we are managing it. Coaching is to unleash the potential of the leader. Coaching is to get the individual who is going through the process to understand how far and how deep he or she can actually use his or her skills, perspective, and it's a mode, it's a platform for individual to understand possibilities. So you could use coaching along with variety of other things that you might be doing with that talent who is critical to your business. But definitely coaching cannot be that prescriptive answer of trying to manage that challenge. So
Absolutely.
if the leader comes and sits in front of the coach and asks that question, I think from a program management perspective, and we have a lot of research, Neelu, where all the research that we have done in India, we have got for high potential space. The number one challenge that comes on the table, which either comes in the way of making a high potential program successful or unsuccessful, has been how we are program managing it. And this is again a classic case. At the end of the day, the sponsor or the person who is or the leaders who are program managing the entire high potential program, they need to be clear about what they are trying to drive, and B, they need to use the right tools at the right places. So coaching can be one of the things that they can do with the leaders whom they are trying to give a message, but that cannot be the messenger per se. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I'll share with you another example, Chaitali, just in 30 seconds. We have companies rushing into the coaching program and not necessarily in tandem with the high potential. And sometimes there is not even a 360. So the coach is expected to clarify that, this person believes that he or she is very good with the teams and peers think the world of them, but actually it is not so. Now the coach is not supposed to be the messenger to be carrying that message. A simple 360 feedback or even an appraisal-based feedback can be, a better tool. And the transparency here is the critical element that I think makes the difference.
Sure. So in fact, I think on this one, how do I see clarity on my status as a hypo, as a topic or as a team? I think the last message that I'd like to leave on behalf of right management is we need to, it's not just enough to actually identify high potentials and in the organization tick the box that now I have identified high potentials. What I communicate, how I communicate, who I communicate, and the degree to which I actually communicate will ensure whether it will succeed in the organization or not. And it will also depend upon how I'm communicating, whether the individuals will actually put their commitment on the table. So if I as a leader actually am sitting in front of a coach or going through any intervention, not knowing completely why I am there, it's the beginning of a much bigger problem. So maybe complete notification is not the answer, but clarity to that individual or to that leader whom you are of course considering as a leader, because I always say that coaching doesn't come cheap, right? Coaching is one of the most expensive but the most effective ways of developing leaders, and that's why perhaps it is used mostly at the senior most levels. So if you're putting that kind of investment on the table, you will have to ensure that you're doing all that is required to get it right as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I come to the next one, which is very very closely connected to the topic of notification. So I have been identified. I'm not completely sure because I have not been notified. But the most important one is I have got some feedback. I went through an assessment process, or I went through a 360, or even as part of a lot of organizations having IDP to be created as part of the assessment process, the appraisal process as an IDP. So I have been given feedback to develop, say, ABC or XYZ skills or capabilities. Most of the times these are around strategic thinking or people management. But my current role is very, very different. My current role is 110% execution actually. I get measured for my ability to get it executed before time, if not on time. But whenever a conversation happens around my development, the conversation is around how I'm not able to think strategically or how I'm not able to take people along. So whenever I come across coaches who actually put this question on the table, they're basically asking me, my performance is flawless, so maybe the managers are trying to use this data point against me. So, and hence I thought it's a very important, field that we should definitely discuss. And this was the first question that we got, Neelu. So far, I've been expected to execute perfectly and rewarded accordingly. However, now I'm being asked to think strategically and focus on team development. So, why is there this new development? Is the organization changing, or are my current skills getting redundant? So, what would be your take on something like this?
So, Chaitali, I would say that it is a bit of many things that contribute to this kind of scenario, but to be called redundant is a very strong term. So, if a company is a market leader, for instance, but the market itself is, I mean, the market share is a declining market share. It's a declining market, and even though they're market leaders, they are not really going to grow that market in a big way. Then that leadership position is very important, but because the share is declining, it's equally important that the organization knows what are the opportunities that are there outside, what kinds of products or services or substitutes are eating into the market share. Is it simply a product life cycle issue? Similarly, it is the case with skill sets. As the market dynamics change, some of the skill sets can be retooled, and some of them, the difference I think is how much are you reflecting on the past and how much do you need to look outside into the future and what's happening. So at a simplistic level, if I can answer this, and I'll go into a little bit of research, I mean, I could have been the best salesperson, but I'm not going to remain a salesperson all my life, right? Even if I wanted to. So if I want to qualify as a sales manager or a product manager or a marketing expert, then along with the new knowledge or the domain, and there was this conversation about why do I have to learn to develop people. I not only need to know sales management, I don't need to know only marketing, all the skills and domain knowledge of marketing. I also need to understand what it is about people that I need to understand. How do I need to manage in people? What kind of vertical development do I need to, show? What kind of peer-to-peer issues will I face? And therefore, one of the biggest things that, in fact, today there is research to show that two or three of the most important things that companies are looking for in leaders is not only how they have performed in the past, what is their agility, how quickly can they get onto the job, what is their ability to survive in a dynamic environment, and how can they get along with people. Because one of the biggest things is, again, depending on my role, I might not have been given the impression that, I'm such a big specialist, I really don't need to sort of understand the people dynamics, but that's not entirely correct. Because as I shared, the world has changed so much. The company is under pressure to even figure out what is the next change that they should be. Yesterday there was color tube technology. Today I don't even know what is the latest, TV technology. So it's very hard to say that it should be, marked and put into a template, and the criteria won't change. I'll share with you an example, Chaitali. I was doing some work for an automobile company, and one of the leaders I was coaching was into product development. So he came to me with some difficulty of managing teams, and he said, I can never, and a lot of organizations use Six Sigma and stack ranking as tools to, I would say, rank their talent. So he had 16 people, and he needed basically some thoughts on how to stack rank them from 1 to 16. And so, of course, as a coach, one doesn't give answers, one asks him to think differently. And after a few conversations, he came back and said that I have actually ranked them from 1 to 16. So I was very surprised because it happened very quickly. So I asked him that what did you use, and he gave some criteria, about something to do with excellence in design, consistency, capability, quality, all of those. So I actually asked him, now you are an automobile manufacturer, you have a Japanese collaboration. If your Japanese partner wanted you to send 2 engineers to Japan for, helping them with designing a new kind of car, do you know who you would send? So he immediately said yes. So my next question was, are they number 1 and number 2 on your ranked list? And as expected, his answer was no. He smiled and he said no. And the difference here is, I think, most of our life we worry about performance, but performance is about the past. So performance is not automatically equal to high potential. So if I've been expected to execute something perfectly and I've mastered that, well, great. You will not forget it just because you're focusing on something new. So don't lose sight of that. That the past and the potential, past performance and potential are two different things, and both are important. Since performance is sort of in the past tense, you can't really change that. The only thing you can change is the present and the future.
Well, and I think that's a very, very important point that you've made. At the end of the day, it's less to do about skills becoming redundant. It's about more about how do I keep myself more, scalable for the organization of the future, and what's the organization's plan for me. In fact, the next question that we have is very closely related on this topic, but I really thought this was an important one to put up before our participants. So the individual asked that the organization evaluates my performance on the basis of my current skills, and the focus is on execution, which is my core strength, which is not surprising to me because in India, most of the times when we look at organizations and typically at the middle management, execution is a strength which helps the organizations make the cut. But the individual says that, but each time they ask me to develop strategic insight, why should I focus on these skills, which you kind of responded in the previous one. But the interesting one that caught my attention here, Neelu, was the balance of the question. And the individual says that there are hardly any opportunities in my current role for me to focus on or develop these skills. How do I prioritize and balance this development?
Right. So I would say that there might or might not be ready-made opportunities, but I can't believe that in an organization there is no value seen in external facing, strategic, long-term, out-of-the-box thinking. So I would say, first of all, recognize what is being asked and what kinds of skill sets we are talking about or mindsets we are talking about. So even if today my role is in execution, the way I do execution, and this I talk to a lot of especially in IT, a lot of project managers say, look, this is the project, this is the output, this is the kind of program I'm supposed to write. What is the big opportunity that I have to think in the future? And the answer to that is, even if the project specs are getting defined, there are enough opportunities in your current and existing role to take decisions. We are making decisions every day on should I do this or should I do that. Throw in some futuristic thinking into that. How long will this decision be? Are there emerging things in the marketplace already that I should factor in, even if it is not part of the project specs? Should I be actually taking the whole game to the next level? Attend external forums, read outside. Most of the problem that I think any coach would be today reading is, most of our leaders are very, very, very inward looking. And that's how they have been kind of, tuned to so far. They've been told, this is your project, this is the definition. But we need actually leaders to start taking charge of what to do in addition to how to do it. So most of the time they're actually not defining what to do, they're jumping into the how. We need to start actually a thinking process, especially in HiPos, on what should I be doing? Should I be doing only this or something else? It might or might not have been given as a ready-made problem from the leader, but hey, that's what a HiPo is all about.
Well, in fact, whenever I have faced this question as a coach, where individuals have stood up and they have said that I just don't have an opportunity where I can develop some of these skills, and I try and get them to reflect on maybe the coaching that they are going through, or even the operational project or the execution project that they deem as has been the most successful one in their careers. Because I always say, even in execution, there is operational strategy that you're bringing into play. It's just that many times we look at strategy very differently, and we think strategy is all about 40,000 feet. But the reality remains that many a times strategy is an intricate part of our activity. It's just that it is more operational in nature. So there is strategy which is operational in nature, there is tactical in nature, and then of course there is strategy which is strategic in nature, which is the quintessential 40,000 feet strategy. Most of the times organizations are looking at strategy and expectation of being able to be strategic at a middle management more from a decision making perspective, which is more at operational and many times even at tactical. What do you say, Neelu?
Absolutely. There is this term called within the box and outside the box innovation, within the box and outside the box strategy. All strategy is not blue sky visioning.
That's
There
right.
is enough elements of strategy which are very, very real and connected to the here and now business results. And I tell many of my coaches, just because it is a Fortune 500 company or a big, large Indian multinational or, a huge corporate entity to which they belong, it does not mean that they have, all the answers are inside the company. So many a times there are business schools, there are engineering colleges, there are outside forums who are nurturing a business idea. They desperately need help from leaders to walk the, path with them, to mentor other smaller organizations. And while in that role, they are going in as the expert. The hypo or the leader is going in as the so-called expert in that particular exercise. What they learn in return is invaluable. And actually it's free. It's not something that they're. So all they have to do is they have to go to their organization and say, look, there is this particular forum, or there is a startup team, or there is these kinds of opportunities. Can I spend 1 hour a month or 2 hours a month on this? If it is not directly competing, I can't see why the organization would say no. In fact, I don't think I've come across a single example like that.
Sure.
So there are opportunities galore, even if it is not fed on a particular menu and handed over.
And I think this was the question for you, Neelu, because we get this indirectly from a lot of our coaching aspirants. What has been your experience with leaders who have coached and who have faced a similar expectation, particularly with those who couldn't make the cut? And this is for, a lot many times we come across leaders who were being put through coaching for a certain skill or a certain competence. And many a times we realize, because the choice has not been made because we are necessarily convinced that they are high potentials. So this is going back to our previous question, right? It is more about a very strong change that we are trying to make in those leaders. And when they are not able to make that cut, how do you think this situation has been handled?
When they're not able to make the cut, again, I think it's a lot to do with thinking through what the communication is going to be. I mean, no organization is made up of only high potential. But I would like to add a little footnote here, Chaitali, for the HiPos, which is that usually people don't make the cut not because of skill but because of attitude. By and large, if there are two people with equivalent skills and equivalent, potential, then the person with the right attitude is the one who makes the cut. So if they haven't made the cut, of course, the organization has to have a mechanism. And I also know it's not the end of the world. I didn't make the cut. Going back to the earlier answer, I can make the cut next year. Maybe I missed out entirely on one particular thing. Maybe the organization was expecting me to do a lot more on my own, and I didn't kind of start the ball rolling till 2 quarters had gone by. I didn't have time. So I can change all of that. So a lot of it is in my hands. But the biggest thing I want HiPos to think about is to get their minds ready. A lot of the times already, I mean, I come across very interesting examples where when you're talking of HiPos and they're getting coached, and you ask them, so what is the one thing that you want to work on and what's the one thing you want to change? They actually, mentally, they have prioritized whose feedback is worth it and whose feedback is not. So recognize that any feedback, any appraisal, any psychometrics gives additional information. Don't get defensive and chart another path. That's what the HiPo is all about. It's not that life is going to end if I haven't made the cut.
Sure. Well, to that I actually come to the next theme that we had, which was on the changing definition of a high potential. And this question was particularly for our HR fraternity, Neelu, where many a times when we are having a series of endless conversations with the HR fraternity who are trying to create a strong, valid, high potential development intervention for their organizations, they do ask this question and they stand up and they say, and in fact I've just got one more question which is on slightly similar lines, which is, around how do I create or design a high potential program which is A, scalable, which is B, dynamic in nature, so that it is relating to the definition of high potential, because the definition of high potential from the business keeps changing. So today my business is doing ABC, And so they have said this is what my high potential should be. And then suddenly after 18 months business has changed, the line of business per se of the organization has changed completely. So now they have come back to me and they have stood up and they have said I need to have completely different kind of high potentials. So the HR stands up and says, so what do I do with the entire work that I actually did and put on the table? So the question that we got was, we identified HiPo for our business, taking into consideration the business needs, and now the business needs have changed. So how do I keep my HiPo selection and development relevant?
Right, and I think I will modify something slightly that I was sharing earlier. Just like the leader is supposed to keep track. See, leaders and HR and any function exists because of the business. So instead of defining and then kind of presenting, it's a continuous process where actually first step I would say is please recognize what the business really needs. So if the definition has changed, chances are there are changes happening for the business which is to do with environment. So step back and delve a little deeper, probe a little more on what they really need. Most of the time businesses will not be able to articulate clearly what exactly they need, because they are not also in a position to say with 99% certainty that this is what they need. They can only say it with 60-70% certainty. So what is that balance? Be sensitive to the fact that if everybody can say something with 100% certainty, chances are those are not the only criteria being looked for, whether the business is stating it like that or not. So as the HiPo program is articulated, I would say plan for a certain amount of change, plan for a fixed component and a variable component of that program itself, and especially with respect to this past performance and future potential element. There is a lot, and in fact if business has not defined it, I would actually go and propose to business saying, do you not need agility for the future? Do you not need the leader to survive in uncertain environment? Do you not need somebody with strategic focus? Actually the kinds of problems that organizations face, regardless of industry, are surprisingly similar. So I would say be a little proactive and work with business to define them together, rather than create a program in isolation, then present it to business. There's a high chance of it coming back saying these are the 21 things wrong with it.
Sure. So, in fact, particularly to this one, whenever we are actually designing high potential development interventions with organizations, and particularly when we are partnering with HR, we always put one very important point on the table. And we say at the end of the day, high potential intervention, like any other HR intervention, is for the business. And because it is for the business, at no point in time can the design be so delimiting that, and if it is delimiting, this is going to be the obvious outcome, where the moment there is a change in the business, all the definitions will actually have to change.
Absolutely.
At the end of the high potential intervention is actually a framework, and because it is a framework, we very strongly say many a times when we are designing this with organizations are really pushing us hard to say, can we take it a level lower, another level lower, and that is where we stand up and say any intervention or a framework, particularly for instance a high potential intervention framework, it has to be left at a framework level. The moment we are going to try and get it to answer our questions like a quiz or like a binary response, it will actually delimit them completely. And I think that is one very important aspect that needs to be kept in mind when it is being designed. So when we are working for very large conglomerates, Neelu, particularly which are working across businesses, and in fact I have got a question which says in real time right now that for a business which actually has more than 100,000 plus population and with multiple business units, is a centralized high potential pool better or a decentralized high potential pool better? In fact, it's a fantastic question, because at the end of the day, the degree of design and the degree of framework articulation will actually decide whether you need to have a common pool or whether you would need to have a centralized, decentralized pool for each of the businesses.
Yes, Chaitali, go ahead.
Yeah, and most of the times one of the things that we suggest to organizations when we are designing this with them is, clarity of purpose. What is it that I want my high potentials to do? It's very, very important to understand A, why am I designing a high potential program for my organization or for my conglomerate? Is it because every other competitor of mine has one? Is it for managing the retention and engagement of my high potential? Or it is about a business perspective 5 years down the line? And I think that's going to pretty much decide going to be the right answer for my organization. And most of the times we spend a lot of time when we are designing the framework, because that will actually ensure that business needs may come and go, but at the end of the day, my high potential can actually go through the same process. The definition of my high potential will obviously change, because today, say for instance, the example that you gave, today I'm an IT company and suddenly from a telecom company now I've become a technology company. A group of people will actually change which are high potentials for my skill, but my high potential definition, which is around leaders who can think out of the box, who are entrepreneurial, who have risk taking capability, and who are able to inspire and have a global mindset, these competencies will actually not change, and hence we will have to really articulate well what is it that I'm trying to develop in my leaders.
And that is why we need a framework, but we don't need each parameter fixed and nailed down, because that will make it a very rigid system. I mean, as we started with, we exist because of the business, and the business exists because of customer and the environment, and no company has been able to predict the last two. So our framework for HiPo must equally be dynamic and agile, the kinds of qualities we are talking about leaders, and work with the business on the same side to be able to develop something that really works in that environment.
Right. So with that we come to the next topic, which is again for high potentials. And this is a very, very interesting one, because like I started off right at the beginning where we said, that not necessarily everybody in the organization goes through a development intervention even after they have been assessed or they have been identified and or notified, So
right.
What should I do since there is inadequate development focus post my HiPo identification? And the caveat that I want to put on the table over here is, this is something that as consulting firms we have seen a lot many times. Organizations start off by wanting to identify high potentials, and I would like to emphasize on the word identifying high potentials. I always say identifying high potentials is like a diagnostic journey. So if I'm unwell, I'm sick, the doctor sends me for a series of blood tests. So the output after I have gone through the blood test, the diagnostic test, is what the HiPo identification, at the process ending at HiPo identification, is all about. I yet have to do something about it. I yet have to treat it. If I'm not going to treat it, I will just die, because I have a terminal problem and I'm not treating it. It's just that I will have a worse death, isn't it? Because now I'm aware of it each day. And this is the message that I want to leave with organizations which start the journey but somehow inadvertently lose focus after identification. And they lose that focus after identification because they think we've got the answer, humko jawab mil gaya hai. And many times they actually stand up and say we've got the answer. I think none of our leaders are as good as we wanted them to be, to also actually take them through the journey. Now that's a very dangerous one, because in that situation you are actually standing up and telling even your leaders who are literally slogging out each day for the organization that none of you are good enough, so we can't do anything. So with that message for the organization, I would like to put some of the questions that we have got from high potentials, and the next one, Neelu, is on that field. So an individual stood up and said that I have been informed that I am a HiPo. However, I do not see anything happening in terms of my career development or growth plan for me. What can I do now in case I do not see any initiative being taken by my organization? And the more interesting one was, how long should I wait before action being taken?
Right. And I think that, again, while the answer may not be black and white, I guess first be a little fair and give the organization a chance to, roll out information and roll out the program in the way it's meant to be rolled out. How long should I wait? I would say, it depends. In most companies, waiting for a quarter is okay. But if the organization is very young, very dynamic, in a dynamic environment, a company in a hurry, sometimes even a month is a long time. And you have to actually take that call. But a quarter is a fair time. If nothing has been clarified, go and take the initiative to figure out what it is that they expect you to do. If the answer is not black and white, I would say you study what is the compelling business problem or the compelling environmental issue or the compelling customer facing problem that is likely to occur if the company continues to carry on like this. At the very least, I would say have your own charter, invest in your own development, identify an internal mentor or an internal coach under whose guidance you can work. Of course, if the organization is willing to let you go beyond and look for an external help also, that's great. But invest, and I think Chaitali once shared this, Chaitali, I don't know whether you remember, many a times we invest in clothes, we invest in entertainment on holidays, but we don't necessarily invest in our own, development. So if the company is not sponsoring to the last pie, what I think the company should be doing, actually consider. Recently, by the way, in a program, I met somebody who said I wanted to attend this one program which was some 20,000 rupees those days, and he said the company did not. He said I took a loan and I paid back the loan so much a month, and I got that certification or whatever, which actually took me to a different level of understanding of that particular facility. Again, it was from an automobile manufacturing company. But show that initiative and take interest and take it in your hands. The company may or may not have all the answers that you're looking for.
Sure. And I absolutely remember, Neelu, because and I absolutely believe in what I said in terms of we never think away in a very consumerist economy. We are okay to spend behind how we are looking, what we are eating, but when it comes to our development, most of the times we are looking in various directions for that investment to come, be it the organization or anyone. And particularly for this question, I have been informed that I am a high potential, but I am not seeing any development intervention coming my way. Whenever I have been faced with this question, I have put two data points on the table. Number one, isn't it good that the organization has let you know that you're a high potential? The organization has actually given you data points, which if the organization doesn't do even after that, it's a loss for the organization, but definitely not a loss for you as much as it could have been had they not even notified you. And hence, if you have a IDP, if you have an assessment output, if you have a 360 output, and a feedback has been provided to you, now it is within your realms to actually work on those development areas, and nobody is actually going to stop you from doing that. And I very strongly believe at the end of the day, the biggest gap or the biggest differentiator between a high potential and a high performer is sometimes expected to be the individual's ability to think for the future and do things for the future. And ability to develop myself and having that desire to learn is one of the most important aspects that will keep me relevant for the future. So if I believe that the organization has identified me as a high potential, I should be a self-starter. I should actually go ahead and do something about myself. There's no harm in actually trying to get it clarified whether the organization will make that investment behind me or not. And I think because if you have been identified as a high potential, the organization in all probabilities will be okay for you to go and pose that question to the organization. But it should not change what I am going to do with myself or for my future. That's my focus area, because at the end of the day, any new skill that I will develop, it will remain with me. And hence I think that's a focus that I should definitely keep with myself.
Absolutely, and in fact, Chaitali, while you were speaking, something little related came to my mind. In all my coaching, I always make it a point to ask the leader to purchase a book. Usually, the book will be 200 to 500 rupees, not more. And I do it not because I can't find the book or I can't tell the company to buy the book, but I want to see how they react. And you'd be surprised at how many come and say that, will you find the place? Can you tell me where it is found? Can I get an invoice for it? Sometimes I find books which are, little unusual to source. So they are actually so worried about who will pay the 200 rupees. So that's one. But on the other side is equally important. You started with this whole organization message, and I'd like to add to that. If you remember, a few, I don't know, four or five Olympics back, We used to send, as a country, send huge contingents to the Olympics. You know, everybody
Right.
had high hopes, but we came back with zero and empty-handed. The time has come when the people deciding, the organizations, the government, grassroots level initiatives, the athletes themselves. Today we are almost sure that when we send a contingent to, the Asian Games or the Olympics, we will come back with something. And it should be that level of predictability. It doesn't matter where we are today, it should become better and better in terms of expectation management and getting the right output that I'm looking for from the program.
Fair, fair. And with that, Neelu, I have the last question that we have got, in fact, from the audience. In fact, there are a couple of people who have asked that question, which is similar to what we have discussed around notification, but more so about what we had captured last year in our High Potential Week, which is, as an organization, should we communicate the talent his or her designation? If yes, then how, and how would it impact the overall environment? So it is basically answering the whole talent notification in a question. So I'll try and go first on it, Neelu, and I'll invite you to share your views after that. The question, is very interesting. As an organization, should we communicate the talent his or her designation? And I think the most important answer that we tried to give last year in our Hypo Week was, you need to give clarity to the individual what we are thinking of that individual. You may call it notification, you may call it clarity of purpose. You at least need to let the individual know. Now, do you want to go all whole hog and say you are a high potential and hence this is what it means for you? It depends upon the maturity of the organization. Some organizations shy away from doing that because those organizations believe I also have a much larger population beyond the high potentials whom I need to manage. And it's agreeable. I think the more important element over here is what am I communicating to my high potentials and what am I communicating to the balance. If I'm able to communicate so as to inspire that talent and also inspire balance of the talent to be part of that league, I should go ahead and do it. But it also depends upon the culture of my organization. To what extent is my culture mature for my managers, who many a times may not have been high potentials themselves, to manage high potentials and manage these people to the next roles. There are 4 or 5 key important parameters. One is the intent, one is the culture, the other is what is it that I intend to do of my high potentials, and do I have a mature high potential intervention designed in the first place. It cannot keep changing year on year. So the first year it did not work out well, so the next year I will go and do something different. Even notification actually has various levels. I go and notify everyone that this is my pool of high potentials. To the second one where I notify the top management and the senior leaders. To the third category where I actually only the HR and the CEO and CEO minus one know. Different organizations treat notification very, very differently. Most of the times the question that comes around notification is, now that I have notified these people, they will become high maintenance and the rest of the people will become low engagement. So there is a constant push between high maintenance and low engagement. And that's where the messaging, the whole program managing bit becomes very, very important. And I recollect last time I had made this comment, I had said, being identified as a high potential, the biggest gift that you can give that high potential is that now you are sitting in a bakery and the gift is to eat cake and eat more cake. Which basically means to be identified as a high potential should be a matter of pride, but also it should not be easy. And hence everybody else who is not part of it aspires to be there, but also gets ready in their mind that if I have to be there, I need to be ready to actually put that extra effort on the table. And only if we have designed the system to that extent should we actually make an attempt to go ahead and make that announcement. And secondly, every stakeholder in the value chain, the manager, the sponsor, the program manager, the future potentials and the current high potentials, everybody needs to know their role and the expectation out of them. Because if we are not able to clarify to that extent, notification can be a double-edged sword, It could actually create more damage than good. However, if you look at some of the most mature organizations,
They like to call spade a spade. They want to differentiate high potential, so they will stand up and they will let the high potential know that you are a high potential. But then the high potential also knows what comes with that notification. It's more expectations, doing more things, and life typically not being, a bed of roses.
Chaitali, may I add something here? Chaitali?
Yeah, sure, please go ahead.
Oh, I think somewhere sort of unstated in this question is the concern that, if I announce one bunch of high potentials, the others will be all disappointed. I think that depends on how you structure the communication. You'd be surprised at how many people don't really want to aspire to be a high potential. They're happy, doing whatever they're doing, and they know that to be high potential takes this additional effort. So only the people probably who aspire to be high potentials would be the ones who this concern would impact. It again, like Chaitali mentioned, it depends on which of the three methods are you actually notifying, and how are you handling the communication for both the HiPos and the others.
Correct. In fact, Neelu, there is this another question which is very, very interesting and a good one to take, which is, can you further clarify how one differentiates between critical talent, high potential talent, and performer talent? And the question has a second leg to it, which says, what about SMEs who are not identified as high potentials? Something similar to what you tried to cover in the first part of our conversation. So I'll actually go ahead with the critical, hypo, and performer difference, and would request you about the SMEs, Neelu.
Yeah, please.
The way we have, and this question has come from Dilip. So Dilip, the way we have actually typically gone ahead and defined critical talent, high potential talent, and performer talent in organizations are as follows. And these terms are used in variety of situations. They are either used around succession, or they are used around talent pipeline creation, and many a times they are also used when you are developing talent for future performing roles. So high potential is someone who is, and our definition of high potential actually looks at 3 data points. So the number one basic premise of high potential is someone who is being viewed for the future roles, alright? So the moment that definition of high potential comes on the table, it is about futuristic skills, and there are 3 areas around which we say someone gets defined as a high potential. Number one, agility, the whole agility model, and we say there are 3 competency areas around which agility gets measured. It's strategic agility, it's execution agility, it's people agility. Because if it is about future, agility is a core requirement in it. And within strategic agility, execution agility, and people agility, you will have an array of competencies which your organization might have defined. But that's just one out of the 3 parts. The second more important part about being identified as a high potential is the leadership confidence in the individual. Eventually, if the individual is being identified for a future role, it's very important that the leadership in the organization has confidence in the individual's abilities. And that could be an outcome of perception that the individual has held. It could be an outcome of perception and past performance, or it could just be a group of leaders who have seen this individual being able to take greater initiative in comparison to others. And the third important data point that we try and see in this case is the aspiration of the individual. No high potential is a high potential unless they have their own aspirations in place. And we mostly stand up when we are having conversations with organizations, and when we are doing development centers where we are trying to identify HiPo, we look at all the 3 data points. So we have an array of things that we do to measure leadership confidence. We have an array of things that we also do to actually measure aspiration of the individual. And you'll be surprised, more often than not, we have come across leaders who have it all except for the aspiration. And they stand up and they say, I know I'm good, but I don't want to be part of the rat race. Now that individual, for all that he brings on the table, may or may not have the drive that you need from a high potential. Because our expectation from a high potential is to be driven and to drive the organization to the next level. And hence, with all those abilities and competencies and capabilities, he or she may yet not qualify to be a HiPo. So the HiPo definition is a combination of leader confidence, aspiration of the individual, and capability from an agility perspective. Now let's look at performer talent. A high performer talent in my business or in any business for that sake is an individual who is a consistent performer. Someone who has performed at a minimum for 3 years at a threshold level and above, and that threshold is not the normal threshold of meets expectations. That threshold is what I would define for someone who is better than the rest. And someone who has been able to do that across various roles if possible is considered to be a high performer. I have been in the same role and I have done the same job. Each year the parameter or the barometer of my performance needs to improve. It is only then that I could be considered a consistent high performer. Similarly, my role needs to change for me to actually excel on that role to be considered high performer. So the organization will define that individual who, regardless of what role you will put, execution will be his or her strength and will actually be able to run that really well. And the third category, which is the critical talent that we put, this is one of the most important kind of talent that gets discussed, particularly when we are having this conversation in organizations for succession planning. So they are typically SMEs, subject matter experts, or leaders at very senior levels who bring a certain skill on the table, which is A, hard to find, B, does not have a backup. So typically in organizations which are technology enabled organizations which have very high value deals getting created, you have certain rainmakers, and those rainmakers are individuals who actually close some of the largest deals for the business. They may have a lot of fallacies, a lot of challenges, but they are known in the business for what they are doing. Now, the business designates them as critical talent because the business cannot lose them or does not want to lose them unless they have a backup for them. And I think this is how the organizations identify critical talent, high potential talent, and performer talent. And Neelu, if you want to answer about SMEs who are not identified as HiPos.
Yeah, I think the framework that you shared, Chaitali, applies equally there. Critical
Absolutely.
talent can also be in the form of SMEs. If I'm making
Correct.
fizzy drinks and I'm the only one who knows how to formulate that, then I am an SME, but I am also a kind of critical talent for the company. Critical talent is not only specialized in one function, because it is important for me to continue to keep abreast of market needs, all the various formulations that are going around, what will work, what will not work. In that case, probably the focus should be on how is the person motivated to keep learning, and not so much be tagged along as a HiPo program. So, each of these means slightly different. SME talent is a variation of critical talent in my mind.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there is this very interesting question that's come to us from Gurpreet. Gurpreet, thanks for putting that question on the table. And the question is, how soon can an employee be identified as a high potential? Is there a minimum numbers of years to be spent on the job? And there is the other question that Gurpreet has asked, which is there an empirical rule or a formula to identify HiPos in an organization? So I'll try to go first on this, Neelu.
Yes, please.
In fact, you may want to look at one of our, articles that will get published on the 16th of May, which is the last day of our HiPo week, and that article is called Evolution of the High Potential Program, which talks about how the high potential program, how the definition of high potential itself has changed, say from the mid-90s to the mid-2000s to now, yeah? And that kind of answers this question, how soon can an employee be identified as a high potential? So earlier in that evolution article, one of the things that we are trying to touch upon is in the mid-90s, where there were lesser opportunities, it was more conservative or a different kind of a format in which organizations were working. People looked at high potentials more for succession, and hence they were actually looked at a certain level and above, say GM levels and above, or function or department heads and above. So the result was a minimum experience was definitely an outcome of that kind of that role, right? Whilst when with the advent of the sunshine sectors, which Neelu also pointed out, there were more opportunities and lesser people with the experience in those opportunities. In fact, all the sunshine sectors that came into our country, nobody had ever worked in those. So you didn't have the leisure, should I say, or the luxury of waiting for experienced people to come up and start up those. So at that point in time, you started looking for talent who were ready to take risks, who were ready to think entrepreneurial, and who were ready to do things completely differently. And that could be someone as young as someone with a total experience of 8 to 10 years. And that's how the definition of high potential started to change for organizations. And cut to today, which we call the third generation of high potential programs, where within the businesses itself, new lines of businesses are coming up. Within the same line of businesses, more opportunities need to be kick-started, where again you're looking for high potentials who are even much younger, who are ready to take that drive, who are ready to work across functions, and who are ready to experiment. So typically when we talk about high potentials, we further grade it into three kinds. There is an early potential, there is a latent potential, and there is a top potential. You need high potentials at each level in the organization, and that's where I keep mentioning clarity of purpose. It's very important for the organization to clarify, why am I developing high potentials? Because that will decide at what level will I look at high potentials, and the question, which is there a minimum number of years to be spent on the job, will actually then be an outcome of that. Having said that, if the organization is trying to look at performance, past performance, as a cutoff or as a filtration criterion, we always say consistency in performance is more important than performance flash in a pan alone. And hence the minimum 2 to 3 years of consistent performance will actually be very, very important. And the next question that you had, Gurpreet, which was, is there an empirical formula or a rule to identify high potential in an organization? We very strongly believe there isn't one size that fits all. It's different strokes for different folks. My organization is different, my organization's needs are different, and hence trying to get a common formula. You could have a similar framework, and that's something that we will put on the table by the 16th. There could be a framework, but there isn't a formula. There couldn't be the same set of rules that will get applicable for identifying high potentials across all organizations. Neelu, if you would like to add something here.
In fact, actually, the more mature the organization is, in fact, I would say the time-tested organizations actually know how to identify high potentials from the very, from probably B school stage itself. So they run a separate program. They pick up under a senior management trainee or an administrative services sort of banner, and those are actually the high potentials. Of course, to remain a high potential, they have to be showing that kind of initiative, performance, attitude on the job all the time. But there is absolutely. So the younger the organization, probably it will be, the high potential program itself will be changing a little faster than for a more tenured, more well-established organization, given the industry.
Sure. And finally, the last question that we have got, and a very, very interesting and a relevant question, which we've got from Prajakta. Prajakta, thanks for putting that question on the table. It's how to retain HiPos in a business downturn condition. Well, this is the question that kind of sums it all. At the end of the day, if I'm developing high potentials for my business for the future, they are my most valuable asset in a downturn condition. Because when the chips are down, that's when the maximum value can be added to the business. But that will only happen if my HiPos are actually engaged to my organization and they see value in being part of the organization. And again, the only way to actually do that is clarify, be transparent. Clarify to the talent what is it that you expect for the talent, expect from the talent, and what are some of the challenges that the business is facing. At the end of the day, with any employee, high potentials also being one of them, the only factor that works is actually building a trusting relationship. If you are able to build a trusting relationship and you are actually able to tell them that you are a high potential and the business needs you, I would have very little reason to believe that the talent will actually not want to vouch for the organization and stick around. It is only in situations where we start behaving opportunistically that the talent also returns the favor to us, should I say, and is very opportunistic. A high potential is also someone who is open to risks, and hence I would always say when the situations are tough, I would ideally believe high potentials should ideally stick around, because they are the ones who then have the opportunity to exhibit their risk-taking ability. And when you are able to grow with an organization when the chips are down, you only grow further from there. You do not go anywhere down. And hence, I think this is a message that we need to give to our high potentials. And I think if you are a high potential yourself, you need to understand that. Eventually, when you are in the market, the organizations also realize if you are only looking out because you're not sure about which direction the business is going. So if you have been identified as a high potential and you're just trying to milk it right now, if there is a big opportunity that the business has and they want to pick you up, they would. But I'm sure the person who might be hiring you will also always keep this aspect in their mind, because always you cannot have an opportunistic attitude towards things for your career.
And all these programs, including HiPo programs, are built around the principle that there is essentially a strong foundation of people engagement and practices in the environment. If those are absent, like you said, trust, actual engagement with the employee, actual reason to want to stay in an organization, then the HiPo won't be the differentiator alone. It can't stick on something which does not exist.
Right. So I think with that, we come to the end of our entire virtual coaching. Thank you so much, Neelu, for your valuable time, and thanks to all the audience who have continued till now. It was a pleasure to have this conversation with each of you, and we look forward to having you all tomorrow in our next webinar and all the events all through the week. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chaitali. It was really, really insightful. Some of the questions that have come are very interesting, and I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chaitali and Neelu. It was really a very insightful session, because we've had the opportunity to answer some very critical questions which usually do not get addressed, when we have any other webinar or just a presentation going on. And it really helped us to kind of make the session as interactive, because we took questions which have actually come in from participants, and we see there are a lot more which are coming in, but we hope that we can address them at a later time, since subsequently we will reply back. So with this, we come to the end of the session. Thank you, Puneet. If you can please let us know of the other following sessions which are coming up.